Hey, good people. This week we are going to be talking about working with family systems and the youth. When we're talking about working with the family systems, it's important for us to understand as it goes through in the very beginning of this chapter that there are various types of family systems. So I'm not going to review all of those that are listed in our chapter, but we know that we have, our nuclear family, we have single parent families, blended families, we have multi-generational families, families within the LGBT community, grandparents as parents type of families. But the long and the short of it is when we think about working within the family unit, we need to approach this similar to the way that we are approaching working with a group, providing therapeutic intervention for group meetings or group intervention, because our family system, excuse my dog as she has a little fit, I apologize, but the family system is comprised of course, of individuals functioning within one unit. So when we think about these individuals in the family unit and the family system, we have to know that we have different personalities, we have different thoughts, we have different perspectives, different attitudes that are going to be coming our way. So when we're looking at working with the family as a whole, we got to understand the dynamics of the relationships within this family system. We have to understand what has been established as the norm within this family system, the norm per their environment. So, you know how from the very beginning of this semester, we've talked about that as helping professionals, we work with the whole person. It's the same thing when we're working with the family as our client. We are working with the whole person or the whole client. So we're working with everything that's involved in this family system, as well as the environment in the family system. Within that family system, we have to recognize what are the roles, what are the boundaries that have been established. When we talk about the roles, we're looking at the expected behavior from each family member. Now, when we're talking about that expected behavior, we have to have the understanding, good people, that within a family system, yes, there may be an identified patient or a primary identified client within that family system. While we have an identified patient or client, we have to be mindful that we're still working with everyone within that system. So what are the expected behaviors, the roles, within that family unit, and especially the behavior as it is dictated by the environment? What are the rules? The rules that have been established in this family system. When we talk about the rules that have been established, we're looking at what are some of the parameters of the behavior that's expected. Are rules in existence or are they absent? Then we're also looking at communication. Oh my goodness, communication in the family system. We know that communication kind of feeds us and gives us direction when we're thinking about relationships. So let me go backwards. So these are the three things we need to think about when working with the family system: the roles, the rules, and communication. From the National Association of Social Workers, this governing organization has provided for us information on policies that we need to be looking at when we're talking about working within the family system. So I want to make sure that I just show the screen and just quickly highlight some of the things that we look at when we're talking about working with the family as the client. We're looking at um, uh, things that we may advocate for, I should say, as a social work position, looking at housing, looking at healthcare, looking at families and children and their education and their care, looking at, of course, gender equality, looking at, of course, our aging parents and how we're taking care of them, looking at policies, practices, and procedures as it may impact LGBT families. So all of that is addressed in the code of conduct or our ethical code through the NASW. But as we're talking about families and family systems, I want to kind of get into, as the book rolls us into, the topic of child maltreatment. The topic of child maltreatment and child abuse is something that is near and dear to me, simply because children in our society, we have two segments of the population that within our society as we function, their voices are somewhat silent, meaning that society as a whole, don't necessarily pay attention or recognize and maybe even honor some of the things that are being said from these two segments of our population. The first segment would be our elderly, the second one would be our children. And so that's why children, the platform of children's rights is pretty important for me. When we talk about child abuse and child maltreatment, we have to have the understanding, good people, that child maltreatment went on for quite some time. And it's very unfortunate that within our society, we had rules and regulations to prevent cruelty to animals before we had it in place to prevent cruelty and maltreatment to children. So that says a lot about what our mindset was, has been, possibly still could be. I'm not saying much, but I'm saying something when it comes down to looking at this vulnerable population of children. So when we're talking about children, just a little historical perspective, we have the legislation CAPTA, CAPTA, Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974. This act is considered our landmark legislation that first acknowledged and addressed child abuse. 1974, y'all. That's what I'm talking about. 1974, that we have this legislation in place. And that's our federal legislation. We have to have an understanding and acknowledge that we do have some state regulations, some policies and procedures, civil laws, criminal laws that are in place when we're talking about child maltreatment and child abuse. But when we're looking at it from a federal perspective, 1974 was when we have, our landmark case of CAPTA, that legislation, that act for the prevention against child abuse. When we're talking about child abuse, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through the various types of child maltreatment. You can read through that in your text, but we have physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and sexual abuse. All of these things are issues that are addressed at an introduction perspective, I'll say, in our chapter. But we have to have an understanding that with these different types of maltreatment, there is a responsibility that comes along with recognizing this type of treatment. When we as helping professionals, when we become knowledgeable of maltreatment towards children and or the elderly, we are required by our state law to function as mandated reporters. Now, yes, currently all 50 states and the District of Columbia, there is legislation on the books in regards to functioning as a mandated reporter. Here in the state of Pennsylvania, functioning as a mandated reporter, you are required to take the mandated reporter course and pass that certification exam after that course. And it's probably about, if you've never taken the course before, it may take you about an hour and a half to complete the course. If you've taken the course before, and actually after you've taken several courses in human services or social work or psychology, you would be able to probably complete the course in 45 minutes to an hour. But the information in the course is very essential in helping you to understand what your requirements are as a mandated reporter, how you identify suspicions of child abuse, how you report child abuse and or neglect, and the overall requirements of being a mandated reporter. Now, when we're talking about child maltreatment and some of the experiences that our children may have, we know that adults, that we have a right and responsibility to care for the children and to intervene as much as possible, being mandated reporters. But we also have to have an understanding about what this child may experience themselves in struggling or in dealing with being a child suffering through abuse, neglect, maltreatment. And one of the things that we think about or that we look at is the stress that children have based on the traumatic events that they have experienced. Now, when you're reading through this chapter and you at the point where you're reading about the historical perspectives and you see the information on the case of Mary Ellen, you can have an idea and a concept in your mind about some of the traumatic or the trauma that children may experience as they are exposed to neglect, abuse, maltreatment. we have to have an understanding that because of this, that there is some specific aid and specific assistance that is needed for the children in order to recover. However, we do also want to understand, as the book points out, that not all children who are exposed to or who are exposed to traumatic maltreatment, abuse, neglect, not all children who are exposed to this adverse experience have lifetime consequences. But those that do, then there are services in place that we have to work with them on. Licensed clinical professionals work with them in creating a stable environment, a sense of resiliency, a sense of self-actualization and accountability, so that they reach a place where they are comfortable and confident in controlling their behavior and responding to different things in different ways. When we're talking about again, child maltreatment, we're getting into this section where we look at how children respond to what took place and what happened to them. And this is this section in the book, very brief, but it is definitely very powerful, where we look at changing the perspective of this child, maybe the family, from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And when we change the questions, there's, of course, a change in the perception and in the understanding and the knowledge of what took place and where this family may be in the healing process. And this is where you, the helping professional, begin to, again, working with the whole person, the child and the family, beginning to establish successful strong working relationships so that you can work towards this place of empowerment, work towards this place of providing the tools, the strategies to get through some of the stressful issues that this child may have faced. Now, when we're talking about child maltreatment, child abuse and neglect, of course, we cannot avoid the discussion of the child welfare system. But when we're talking about the child welfare system, let me go back. These are some of the issues that we look at when we talk about child protective services, when we talk about child welfare, some of the things that are brought out in our book that we look at. How we support families, preservation of families. But the section that I want to get to is the discussion on the foster care system. When we talk about child welfare and foster care, the whole idea behind foster care is that it is intended to be a temporary, safe place for children to be in order that the parents and the child can work towards reunification. The parents may need to work on some things, child may need to work on some things, but the overall goal that we look at when we talk about foster care is reunification, getting children placed back into the home with their parents. So we know that foster care is a necessary entity sometimes simply because of some of the things that may be going on for the parents as well as for the children. You could have issues of child abuse and endangerment. You could have issues of parental abandonment, sometimes due to death, sometimes due to incarceration. Sometimes you may have the idea that parents are just unwilling or unable to be caretakers. There may be an issue with the child's behavior, could be an issue with the parents' mental health or physical well-being. There's always, I shouldn't say always, but there are regularly always reasons that a child may be in foster care. But regardless of what precipitates this child being in foster care, we have to have an understanding that there is going to be trauma that this child deals with while they are in the foster care system. And that trauma comes just from being separated from their natural parents. We have to understand, good people, that regardless of how bad the situation may be, a child will always have that connection with their natural parents. I was in a discussion with a young lady several months ago, and I did not recognize, I didn't realize that when she was in school, with my son, as a student in high school and middle school with my son, I did not know that she was living in an abusive household. Not that I needed to know, but this was information that was new to me when I was speaking with her several months ago. And she began to talk with me about her living situation and some of the things that she experienced and what it was like for her growing up, and some of the things that she still is concerned about with younger siblings still in the household. Overall, this was a conversation that lasted probably for about an hour and 15 minutes, just with her exhaling and pouring out. And at the end of this conversation, as we were parting ways, the thing that this young lady said to me that I will never forget is, she said to me, "Please don't think badly of my mom, because I still love my mom." Regardless of everything that she experienced as a child. She is now in her mid 20s, but everything that she experienced as a child, the abuse, the neglect, the abandonment, she still had that connection with her child. So we have, or with her mother. So we have to have that understanding, good people, that although sometimes foster care is a necessity, children still have that relationship or some type of bond with that natural parent. It may not be as strong as what some may experience, but we got to recognize that that bond is still there. So when we're talking about the child welfare system and foster care, some of the things that we look at is, how well do we prepare these children for success in living away from their natural parents? Sometimes we do this with what's called kinship care. And kinship care is basically identifying a relative that is willing and able to care for the child outside of the parent's home. Some of the issues or the benefits that go along with this, of course, would be the familiarity, if I could speak clearly, of the person caring for them from the child, and the caretaker also provides us a stable environment for the child and the caretaker. Some of the challenges is going to be, again, this issue of safety, protection, accessibility from the parent into this family member's home to the child. So again, that's a challenge that has to be looked at. Sometimes we look at issues of independent living. When children are in the foster care system and they age out, that's what it's called, is aging out of the foster care system, but still they are not completely independent, meaning that they still may be in high school. They may not have any post-secondary plans. So there are programs that are available for children who have been in the foster care system, referred to as independent living services, that assist young people in, after they turn age 18, assist them in becoming independent in their lifestyle and in becoming independent and living away from the foster care system. As we continue in talking about child welfare, one of the things that we look at is the whole idea of permanency and family reunification. Of course, with permanency and family reunification, permanency, we're looking at definitely you, the helping professional, establishing a plan that is going to be in place, that we're looking at um, uh, permanent housing or permanent situation for this child, getting them out of the foster care system. That permanency could come in the form of returning to their natural parents, that reunification, or it could be that this child stay with their foster family and become and be adopted into that foster family. Overall, again, the whole idea behind foster care is providing a safe place, but we need to make sure we have some permanency. We want to try for family reunification. And we also want to look at things that are going to provide solutions, solution-based therapy or solution-based work for the caretaker, for the child, that is going to enable, again, this sense of empowerment, this sense of self-actualization, this sense of I can do it, and be successful in various things. Now, I want to jump back a little bit to what I had talked about a little bit earlier when I said one of the issues about permanency could be adoption. When we talk about adoption, adoption can take place in a number of different ways. Of course, you see the definition here on the screen for the legal process of adoption, which would be the transferring of parental rights from birth parents to adoptive parents. The different types of adoptions that we have in place would be, again, when we're talking about the child welfare system, different types of adoption would be a foster care adoption, which is a child is adopted from the foster care system into a permanent family. Domestic infant adoptions. When we talk about infant adoptions, yeah, the book talks about that they are declining simply because a lot of people, when they are adopting, and we'll talk about domestic infant adoptions, when they're talking about the topic or researching the topic of adoption or increasing the family, it's a challenge, good people, for folks to release from their thought process the idea of not having a baby. And so infant adoptions is it is very popular. However, it's time consuming and it's a long waiting period. Like I said, simply because some people can't get out of their minds that I want a baby. So sometimes we see the result of international adoptions. And international adoptions usually take place when we're looking at families expanding, I should say couples expanding their families and families expanding through infant adoptions, international infant adoptions, and up to toddlers that some folks will adopt. And even now, I think it is safe to say that we have seen even younger children being adopted internationally here into the United States, into permanent families. The final adoption type of adoption that our book talks about is customary adoptions. Customary adoptions are adoptions that are, for lack of a better word, it is safeguarding our Native Americans, our Native Indians, so that our Native Americans, when they are adopting children who are members of a Native American tribe, then they are able to stay within that Native American community. And the customary adoption is one that it enables, like I said, it enables the children to stay within a Native American tribe, that even though parental rights are terminated, there is still the idea of community. There is still the accessibility, and there is still the foundation of your heritage and your ethnicity through the Native American, through this Indian Child Welfare Act. As we go on and we talk a little bit more about child welfare, just wrapping up this part here, child welfare that we look at, oftentimes some of the issues that are looked at would be those relating to children, minority children, children in marginalized populations, children who are low income, minority by race and ethnicity. When we're looking at child welfare services for these children, sometimes we have to be mindful of the incidences that occur that are creating this cycle of events, or this cycle where we see children in child welfare services. We have to have an understanding of the resources that are available, an understanding of the mental health services, and are they being made available to children within marginalized populations. And also there's the issue of reunification with children coming from minority populations. Our final part in this chapter deals with services for the youth. When we talk about services for the youth, our book begins talking about school social work and some of the things that take place from the perspective of a school social worker. I want to jump here to this slide and talk a little bit about collaboration with communities and schools. It is very important when we're talking about working with families and youth that when we have our school social worker and this whole concept of collaboration, we're looking at trying to deliver seamless services to our children, seamless educational services to children from school to community to family, so that there is this idea of, or I should say the concept of education and looking at making sure that we meet all of the child's, as many of the child's needs, I should say, as possible, that they have a strong and a good impact educationally, that they're set up for success educationally. So we've seen, when we talk about the collaboration with communities and schools, we've seen where we had an increase in before school programs, after school programs. Again, trying to create a seamless delivery of services so that a child is prepared for the school day, but also has some type of assistance at the end of the school day. When we're talking about social workers within a school system, we have specifically social workers working with children with special needs. And when we talk about children with special needs, we have the legislation that we follow from 1975, Public Law 94-142. This is the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And this act, Public Law 94-142, is one that enables social workers and the school professionals, the educators, to work together for the opportunity of inclusive classrooms for children with special needs. Now, I need you to be mindful of something, good people. When we're talking about children with special needs, we're not just talking about children who may have a learning disability or a mental health diagnosis. Children with special needs also includes those children who are in the gifted and honored category, gifted and honored student, because those students also have special needs outside of the realm of a typically developed child. Your typically developed child is going to be your, your AB type of student. But then you have, of course, students that may have learning disabilities, those that have uh, the accelerated learning, I should say. So you're gifted students. All of these students have what's called individual education plans or individual education programs that are created by school social workers with educators and parents to ensure, first of all, inclusivity in the classroom, and also that their educational needs are being met. Also, school social workers deal with and work with children around the idea of youth suicide. Unfortunately, youth suicide continues to increase within our society. And as you see here on the slide, and as you read in the textbook, it's the third leading cause of death amongst our adolescents. And when we think about social workers, school social workers, working with our youth around the issue of suicide, this is where we have uh, the idea of working with programs within the school as well as outside of the school. How do we bring these things together? Also being mindful that school social workers working with students who may be experiencing suicidal ideations, they must function under that duty to warn. This is something that we talked about in earlier chapters. So that if there is a student within the school system that talks about wanting to harm themselves or someone else, that school social worker is mandated to follow up and report that child and work with that child and the parents in providing safety for that child so that they do not harm themselves or anyone else. Other services that we look at for youth outside the school system is going to be working with our runaway and homeless youth. When we talk about working with the runaways and the homeless youth, again, just as we have been talking about from the very beginning, our perspective from the helping professionals is to work with the whole person. And in working with the whole person, we see here our micro, meso, and macro levels that we have to work with. When we're talking about that micro level, we're looking at working with the individual child. What are some of the traumas? What are some of the issues that this child or this young person may be dealing with? And we work with them in a therapeutic environment. When we talk about that meso level, this is where we begin looking at that circle of trust that that the child or the young adult may be functioning in. That meso level, how are we going to create this era of teamwork for this young person, this support system for this young person, that they know that they have someone to lean on, again, in that meso layer, that circle of trust. That macro level, this is where we begin to look at all of these outside, or the systems, I should say, that could be at play impacting or that could have an influence over this young person or young adult. We look at the educational system. We look at the community. We look at policy and procedures. We look at other helping professionals. What's at play that could impact the services that are available for this young adult when we talk about runaways and homeless youth? Finally, we look at the topic of sex trafficking with our minors. We have to have an understanding, y'all, that even in the smallest communities, sex trafficking, human trafficking is a real thing. And it is a real danger to our children and youth. One of the things that the book talks about when it begins to discuss sex trafficking, it says here The Victims of Sex Trafficking and Violence Protection Act of 2000 defines sex trafficking as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of commercial sex act. We have to know again and be able to identify when we see someone that may be struggling, that may be within this realm of sex trafficking. The book gets into discussions about the children and the young adults that are at high risk at being coerced into sex trafficking. We look at how do we provide services for these young adults and for these children after they have been rescued from this place of bondage, so to speak, with sex trafficking and human trafficking. Our network of care, our trauma-informed approach. We're looking at, with the network of care, we're looking at medical issues, we're looking at mental health issues, we're looking at housing, we're looking at education, we're looking at, again, just basic life skills for these young people. When we talk about the trauma-informed approach, we're looking at how, again, are we providing the necessary tools to empower these young people to be successful, to pull away from the mindset that they had, that mindset of bondage when they were stuck in that trafficking environment, to being able to build them up again, going from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, going from these deficient needs, the need of security, of emotional protection, of physical needs being met, going all the way up to this being need, BEING, that self-actualization, that I can now be successful, that I can be safe, that I can be happy, that I can have purpose to everything that I do every day. All right, so this is the chapter on social work with families and youth, good people. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to contact me by email or call me on my office phone. There will be a discussion post in this week's folder, along with an assignment for you to complete for this chapter. So again, any questions, comments, or concerns, call me. All right, y'all have a good one, and we'll see you again real soon.